Hello and welcome to Forbidden Talk, a programme dedicated to discussing sensitive social topics in the Middle East. This week our focus is on the destruction of cultural and religious heritage in the region as a result of the toils of war and more recently the deliberate obliteration and looting of artefacts by ISIS in Iraq and Syria. We should be looking at the impact of these atrocities on their communities and what this means for their identity. Are the ancient relics actually being destroyed or rather trafficked to fund terrorism? And what are the wider implications of how the destruction of history can affect the future and future generations? At this point, I'd like to welcome my studio guests, who are both council members of the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, a charity based in London, which funds and carries out research and public education on Iraq and neighbouring countries. We have Joan Porter-McKeever, Executive Director of the Honor Frost Foundation, and Dr. John McGuinness, Independent Postdoctoral Researcher at the MacDonald Institute for Archeological Research in Cambridge. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
But before we move on, let's take a look at this brief report.
Beheadings, burning and black market oil trading have been common themes in Islamic State group's method of terror. But in the past few months, the group has begun targeting the religious and cultural history of Iraq and Syria. The group has destroyed religious archaeological sites including Hatra, Nineveh and Nimrud, burning shrines, mosques and churches. In February, ISIS released a video apparently showing militants with sledgehammers destroying statues and other artefacts in a museum in Mosul. In the video, the objects are described as false idols and their destruction defended in religious terms. All 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Syria, representing more than 2,000 years of history, have been damaged. Major museum collections at Homs and Hama have been looted, and dozens of ancient towers have been obliterated by shelling. ISIS has generated significant revenues from the plunder of historical artifacts in Iraq and Syria, and encourages digs at archaeological sites, taking a share from the sales. Looted antiquities from Syria worth hundreds of thousands of pounds are providing a major source of funding for ISIS, some of which could be ending up in the UK. A recent investigation found looted pieces included statues of animals, vases, gold coins and glasses, with one artifact reportedly fetching $1.1 million. Many questions arise from all of this, such as where or who are the stolen artifacts being sold to? Why are ISIS destroying these sites? And with the Middle East being so rich in history, why are only Syria and Iraq being targeted?
John, as an archaeologist, how do you feel when we just watched that footage? How do you feel?
Well, I think I feel the same way as the whole world. Utter outrage and revulsion at what is done, and deep sadness at the loss of, it's not just the history of the people who live in Syria and Iraq, although of course we all feel very strongly for them in all accounts, but it's part of the history of the world.
I mean, Joan, could you put some of these works into context? How important are they?
I think they are of critical importance for the region, but really, as John says, for the whole world. This is our heritage. This is the heritage of the world. And by having it destroyed in this way and taking away what perhaps could be a unifying method to keep Iraqis together, by having them concentrate on their heritage, by this destruction, you're just trying to destroy that. And perhaps in some ways, maybe it will bring the Iraqi people together by trying to confront what has been happening in their country, which is... I mean, you know, people who watch, when you watch these for the first time, you really do feel revulsion. And then afterwards you reflect and you realize that they actually are succeeding in getting the airtime from all of us for what they're doing and the destruction that they've created.
Well, that's the point. And do you think they're succeeding?
Well, they're succeeding getting the airtime, but I don't think it's doing them any good. They, of course, have no right to be doing this whatsoever. And the people that they're ruling over, the Iraqi and Syrian citizens currently under Islamic State, I'm sure that the vast majority of them do not share their views and are equally outraged, and they must feel awful at their impotence to do anything about it.
But why precisely Iraq and Syria? What is it about Iraq and Syria that is so important for ISIS to destroy this civilization there?
Of course, the reason they're destroying artefacts in Iraq and Syria is that's the territory which they control. From an archaeological point of view, this is part of what we call the cradle of civilization and the Fertile Crescent. So to take the first of those two, it's called the Fertile Crescent because crops were first domesticated in that area, and that led to the production of food supplies which made civilization possible, and then it led on to the emergence of the great civilizations.
And Joan, how is ISIS justifying their actions?
Well, they believe this is idolatry, so they are treating it as though these are things against their Islamic beliefs. They believe the caliphate has the right to control the regions that they're in. They have absolutely no respect for heritage and actually individual human rights. We can see that.
And I'd just like to, before you go on that point, is they claim that they're destroying these figures in case they fall victim idolatry, which is clearly not going to be, this never would be the case, and presumably they're thinking of injunctions against the showing of images. But the very fact that they use images of people underlines the emptiness of their philosophy and their morality. The hypocrisy, thank you.
But also, I mean, Islamic law states idols that are not worshipped need not to be destroyed. So, again, a contradiction there.
Absolutely a contradiction. The Islamic State has succeeded, to the extent it has succeeded, because it's managed to convince a certain number of Muslims that they are doing something which is deeply Islamic. But it's a lie. They are not fulfilling the objectives of Islam.
John, reports of Akkadian artefacts dating back from the 7th century BC and some of the most ancient art, 3,500 years old. I mean, what does this mean from an archaeological point of view?
Well, it is exactly as Joan said. It's a priceless treasure, and it's a treasure in the heritage of all mankind. Of course, the art history of Iraq goes back further than that. I mean, at least 5,000 years ago, for the written period, the historic period, before that as well. But to answer your question directly about the sculptures from the Assyrian Empire, as you say, from 2,700 years ago or thereabouts, that they are among the most magnificent treasures and artistic expression from antiquity.
Okay, well, moving on. Now joining us over Skype is Giovanni Boccardi, Head of Emergency Preparedness and Response Unit Culture Sector at UNESCO in Paris. Giovanni, could you give us an idea of the extent of damage being done in Iraq and Syria?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for having me in the program. Well, there are 6 World Heritage properties in Syria, including the old city of Aleppo, the ancient city of Damascus, the city of Bosra, the Chevalier, and Palmyra and the ancient villages of the northern Syria, and they have all been affected to some extent, some very heavily, like Aleppo, through collateral damage because they are at the front line of the conflict, and others because they've been used as military grounds, like the Crac du Chevalier, or in Palmyra, the fort of Palmyra. So the two parties sort of shooting at each other have damaged the properties. Then we have many other sites, of course, which are not on the World Heritage list, but which have been affected. There has been a report recently which speaks of about 290 cultural heritage locations which have been touched, of which some completely destroyed, other severely damaged, about 100, and the rest also affected.
How many in total are there? Cultural heritage?
You mean World Heritage sites is 6 at the moment. The figure that was given in this report issued recently by UNOSAT, which is a UN sort of organization which does remote sensing, refers to 290 cultural heritage locations. These have been affected to different extent. And then there are the museums, at least 5 of which, as far as we know, have been also affected in different places. And then, of course, there are archives, there are also objects in libraries, and so it's a very, very worrying picture that includes, let me add, the intangible heritage associated to the practices, rituals, and knowledge of the people that have been sort of forced to leave their villages and houses and which are now refugees in camps. There are hundreds of thousands of them, and this intangible cultural heritage is also very important. It's actually very connected to the physical heritage, and unless the situation is sort of remedied in the short term, this is also at risk.
Yes, they're interconnected, aren't they? I mean, there's also reports of artifacts being stolen. Where are these going?
Well, of course, this is an illicit traffic which is hidden by definition, so we don't know for sure. But traditionally, those who have studied the problem speak of one of the greatest sort of criminal businesses, possibly second only to traffic in arms and drugs. Some suggest that the total amount of profits that comes from this type of trafficking might range between 7 and 10 billions of dollars worldwide. In Iraq and Syria, we of course assume that these objects might be transiting through the neighboring countries and then also passing through transit countries that act as markets and then end up in their final destinations, which might include the US, the UK, Switzerland, and I mean the places where traditionally people go to buy very precious antiques.
So those neighboring transit countries, where are they?
Well, they're all around Iraq and Syria, of course.
So Lebanon and Turkey, we've heard, are two countries.
Well, the Islamic State, of course, you know where it is, so it has a long border with Turkey, so it is possible that items might be smuggled through that border. We know that some items have been seized by the custom police of the Turkish and in Jordan as well, but of course many more might be getting through, and of course this is a matter of great concern.
And what is currently being done about the devastation?
Excuse me, can you...
What is being done about the devastation at the moment?
Well, in the areas that are sort of still under the control of the Islamic State, of course, UNESCO has a little capacity to act because we don't have an army. We are at the moment conducting monitoring together with a number of other partners and also through satellite imagery. Then we are also trying to sort of fight this business of the illicit trafficking, addressing rather the demand side and not the supply. So we are working with the customs, with police, with Interpol, with museums, with auction houses to try and disrupt this business by building awareness, by reinforcing the legislations in each country, by also sharing information. For example, Interpol has a database of 45,000 items, including many from Iraq and Syria. And ICOM, the International Council on Museums, red lists. And UNESCO acts as a sort of nodal point in this network by making sure that this information flow sort of continues to go on, so that people on the ground know, for example, when they are facing an object that might come from a museum which has a catalog. It is more difficult, of course, when objects are coming from illegal excavations, because they are by definition not recorded. But it was very important that last month the UN Security Council passed a resolution, number 2199, that establishes a ban on the trade of cultural objects from Syria, which reiterates a similar provision that was already taken for Iraq in 2003. So from now on, it is illegal to buy or sell objects coming from these countries of which you cannot prove that they were legally acquired. So we want to work with the member states of the United Nations and all our partners to make sure we are implementing this resolution and making it more difficult for these groups to sort of profit from this illegal trade.
Okay, Giovanni. Well, I'd just like to bring in Joan here. You're nodding quite a bit there. Did you have anything to add?
I would say that the whole issue of dealing with the demand side is probably one of the strongest things that we can do today. In Iraq and Syria, you can do very little about the looting, but we do have, and what Giovanni is saying is absolutely true, that if we don't deal with the demand side, it will keep happening, and you have to cut off the channels and the money that's flowing and supporting ISIS. That, to me, is one of the crucial things to do.
And I just wanted to ask Giovanni a question. To what extent do the authorities know who the dealers are?
Well, this is a very difficult question because at the moment we don't have too much intelligence from who names of people who are actually doing this. We have unconfirmed reports, but I don't want to sort of mention any names in public. But there are allegations of groups working, for example, at certain archaeological sites in Libya with bulldozer. There are rumors of Islamic State sort of subcontracting this business to local organizations and imposing a tax. But all of this, in fact, are just allegations that we have not been able to confirm 100% through some concrete evidence where we know exactly the facts. And we are actually working with all our partners, including intelligence of member states, to find out more, because of course it will be important at some point that those responsible will be held accountable for these crimes. And I'm here referring also to the intentional destruction of cultural heritage sites.
And Giovanni, if beheadings weren't enough, the world's attention has certainly been grabbed by the devastation of antiquities. Could one argue that ISIS has succeeded in its aim to grab the world's attention and provoke fear?
Well, to grab the world attention, I guess it's a fact, the very fact that we are speaking about it now, it's a demonstration that they have a certain talent for the propaganda. There is no doubt about it. What is important is that we are able to promote a different narrative, that with the help of media like yours, we are able to sort of send a different message, you know, which is not divisive, which explains that cultural diversity can be actually a positive thing, that heritage is shared by everyone. And UNESCO, to do this, has recently launched a major campaign, which is called #UniteForHeritage, which is accessible on many social media. And I would like to take this opportunity to encourage our viewers to actually check on this campaign and participate, because it's important that we also equip ourselves with the sort of with weapons, of mass communication to counter this narrative.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a term your colleague Irina Bokova, head of UNESCO, coined was cultural cleansing. What did she mean by this?
Yes, cultural cleansing refers to a deliberate strategy to sort of erase the cultural references of groups and communities precisely with the intent of denying their right to exist as such, as others, as communities with a specific cultural sort of background. It's, of course, a strategy that has involved the persecution of minorities, the killing, the discrimination, but also the destruction of cultural heritage, the burning of books, of manuscripts, the demolition of museums, the killing of journalists and media, for example. It's all part of a totalitarian ideology which is strictly connected with the humanitarian and security issue. So what Mrs. Bokova is trying to say is that this is no longer just a cultural emergency, but it's a security and humanitarian imperative. Because the destruction of culture and the killing of people, attacks on people, go hand in hand here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Giovanni Boccardi from UNESCO. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Joan, how independent are NGOs and organizations like UNESCO?
Well, UNESCO, as Giovanni says, plays a huge, crucial role. They are not an army. So unfortunately, many other people need help in this fight against what's happening. And people even on the ground, people in in Iraq should be keeping records. The people in Syria are keeping records. They're watching out who's doing what. There are drones that are going over. There are different groups that are also helping in monitoring the destruction that's going on. And without that kind of monitoring, later on you will not have the proof to bring people to account. And to be very honest, the world has quite a long memory. This is destruction, but that doesn't mean that later on people can't be held to account for what they're doing now. That's also of people and the murders that they've encountered, but it can also be for the objects that they've destroyed. And that should be something that people should be aware of.
Well, you mentioned people. I mean, 1 million dead in Iraq, 200,000 deaths in Syria, and that's only an estimate. Isn't this a bit of a luxury? We're focusing on archaeology, on architecture. Surely when human lives are at risk, at cost, I mean, shouldn't we be focusing there?
Well, I'm very glad you brought that question up. That's an important and central question. And I think it's crucial that we take this concern. First of all, of course, I do, and I'm sure we all do, feel dreadfully for all the people who are suffering in Iraq and Syria because of the rule of Islamic State. And I would repeat as what everyone else says, we should do everything we can to bring that to an end as quickly as possible. And I don't think we are doing that. I think our governments are doing something, but is Britain doing everything it could do to overthrow Islamic State? I don't think it is. I think we could do more. The suffering, the death of people and the other suffering is a horrible humanitarian crisis, and there's no other word for it. But the destruction of cultural heritage is also a humanitarian crisis. Culture is part of who we are. Our history is part of what makes us who we are, part of identity. Part of the reason the Islamic State is doing this is to eradicate those roots and identity. Is our identity a luxury? No, our identity is central to who we are.
You said the British government can do more.
I think we could do more. I know that we have some units of the Air Force over there, and there are military training Kurdish fighters, and that's very good. I'm glad we're doing that. I think, by the way, we were slow getting there. If you go back a couple of decades, in 1991, Britain led the way in the creation of the no-fly zone, which led to the beginnings of an independent and peaceful Kurdistan. And I think that when Mosul was taken and when there was then the move on Erbil, I think the British government was very slow to react to that. I do think.
But I think we also have to say that the Iraqi government has a little bit of a role to play in this. And Mosul was, I think, neglected by the Iraqi government. And that can't be good for the internal situation. Now they're trying to address some of these issues, and hopefully after taking Tikrit. But I think when Mosul becomes an issue, I really hope that whatever forces do get involved, that they are very conscious of the cultural side as well as the humanitarian side, because Mosul is important for a wide range of individuals, and unfortunately the sectarian side of it all has related to, I think, a lack of attention to Mosul for a long time.
Yes, I would absolutely support that statement, and bear in mind, of course, that Mosul, I mean, an ancient city, I mean, a truly ancient city, the roots go back 7,000 years or more in terms of Nineveh, but Mosul itself, a wonderful old medieval city, which has suffered horrible damage at the hands of Islamic State, not just the ancient Assyrian heritage, but the Islamic heritage.
And the museum too, of course.
And there again, just why we mentioned that, the fact that they're destroying Islamic heritage, but what kind of ideology is that which destroys their own heritage?
Exactly. But what about Egypt? They've got pharaohs, tombs, Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens. Why are they attacking those?
They have lots of looting in Egypt, but they actually, at least, I mean, I don't think, I might not know my political situation, but ISIS doesn't have the stronghold in Egypt, and the Egyptian people rely on the tourism. Without tourism, places like Tunisia and Egypt can't exist. And so, of course, anytime something like this happens, that brings the country to its knees. Within Iraq, someday, tourism may be a very vibrant part of what it has. But right now, it doesn't. Right now, tourism in Iraq is a bit of...
Yes, that's absolutely right. Iraq has the potential for a wonderful tourist situation. So they're not only destroying the past, they're destroying the future by doing this.
Well, we'll hold that thought. We will come onto the future in a moment. But joining us now over the phone is novelist, poet, journalist and peace activist Richard Edmondson from Nashville, Tennessee. Richard, you wrote an article last month, Have Pillaged Iraqi Artifacts Ended Up in a Museum in Israel? What prompted you to write this?
Well, the article discusses an exhibition that opened recently within the past few months at an Israeli museum, the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem. The exhibition is of a bit over 100 cuneiform tablets that purportedly show, give information about the daily lives of the biblical Israelites during the period of the Babylonian exile. But the exhibition is kind of prompted a controversy, and there have been questions raised about maybe the provenance of the cuneiform tablets. The tablets belong to an Israeli collector by the name of David Sofer, who says he acquired them he purchased them from someone in the 1990s, and that person in turn had acquired them through a public auction in the 1970s. But he reportedly refused to name the person that he purchased them from. But at any rate, the exhibit has attracted a lot of attention. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz has called it an extraordinary exhibition. And of course, all of this comes...
extraordinary because?
Extraordinary in terms of what it reveals, supposedly about... I haven't seen the exhibition myself, okay, but supposedly in what it reveals about the lives of the Israelites during the time of the Babylonian exile in the 5th and 6th centuries BC. But of course, all this is coming at a time when cultural heritage sites, archaeological sites are being pillaged and looted and destroyed in Iraq. And it's, there's also been questions raised about how much, people have pointed out, of course, that neither ISIS nor al-Nusra have attacked Israel, and in fact, there's been reports of terrorists being transported across the border into Israel for medical treatment. So it's just kind of all of this is coming about at the same time as this exhibition has opened in Israel in terms of these cuneiform tablets.
Okay, well, in your article, you pose quite interesting questions, actually. One which stuck out for me, amidst all the destruction in the Middle East, you asked what history and artifacts are actually being preserved in the region. What?
Well, sure. Well, it seems to me that there's a lot of efforts being made to preserve Jewish heritage, while at the same time, all of this destruction is being carried out by ISIS and basically destroying everyone else's heritage at the same time. So
you think there's something macabre going on there?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to speculate one way or the other, and it may be that David Sofer's explanation that he purchased the tablets legally in the 1990s, that may be a fact. That may be factual. But there's been, there have been, of course, instances of a lot of cuneiform tablets and other artifacts being stolen and illegally removed from Iraq. This occurred in the wake of both the 1991 war as well as the 2003 war. And, a lot of this stuff has been recovered, but certainly not all of it.
Joan, have you heard of these stories?
Well, absolutely, and of course John's field is cuneiform tablets to a certain extent, but no, I have to say that I just actually recently read your article and I found it very interesting. I don't understand collectors who aren't really willing to prove exactly where their objects have come from, because that should be actually a requirement of anything that's
so
going on
it's not
in the
at the
museum.
moment. One doesn't need to declare.
Well, you do in theory. I mean, a museum should never be holding a show of artifacts that have a provenance that is not clear. That actually, in the world of today, in modern museum ethics, would be considered to be inappropriate. Israel doesn't always follow the same regulations as other countries in terms of how they handle their antiquities authorities, and obviously they're doing a lot of excavations in occupied territories, which in itself is an issue for some archaeologists, and so there are different issues there. But I think maybe on the cuneiform tablets, I should turn over to John.
Well, there's a lot to comment on this situation, and it raises some important issues. With regard to whether or not they were legally acquired, I would say it's nigh on impossible that they were legally acquired. The 1990s was a state of chaos in most of Iraq, and it was another time when there was gross looting of sites, and this must be the scenario in which these tablets left the country. It's a shame that Giovanni he's not with us anymore, is he? Because it raises an extremely important question. On the cultural heritage side, the most important thing at this stage is for us all to be aware of the preservation of cultural heritage, and in due course restoring and helping to rebuild countries and building museums and so on. But just preserving cultural heritage has to be the most important thing at this stage. But what do we do with these looted artifacts? It's awful and lamentable, that's not a strong enough word, that they have been looted, but they exist. The world needs a policy on that. UNESCO, this would be my suggestion, UNESCO should hold an international worldwide conference to address this issue. These cuneiform tablets, the actual tablets are certainly genuine, and they do indeed...
Can you just tell us what they are? Cuneiform tablets.
Right, I of course don't have one on me, but cuneiform tablets, they're generally made of clay and say from the size of a matchbox to the size of a cigarette packet or maybe a paperback novel. That's the normal scale of size. Made of clay, and they wrote by impressing a reed into the wet clay and leaving permutations of triangular shapes.
So they're manuscripts?
They're manuscripts, yeah. They're ancient manuscripts.
Written in...
Or lists of somebody's shopping or somebody's, legal... They're a mixture of things, aren't they? Not just written
absolutely,
word.
And very much like the Roman alphabet. The cuneiform was a writing system which could be applied to any language, and it was used for many languages, though Assyrian and Babylonian and Sumerian are the chief ones. And it could be used for writing anything, so lists of laundry, royal inscriptions, prayers, incantations, private letters, anything could be written. Going back to these... That's what
I think a lot of these tablets that are on display at the museum in Jerusalem are just basically ordinary items, like you say, like laundry lists, but the gist of it seems to be that taken all together, it provides an amazing level of insight into the daily lives of the people during this period.
That's right. From what I understand of this archive, and I haven't seen it, but they are Babylonian tablets dealing with the agricultural administration of a village of Jewish deportees. And that is, of course, tremendously exciting, tremendously important. And they are, to pick up on something you said earlier, they are, of course, very important from the point of view of Jewish heritage, but they are international heritage, and they are, of course, Iraqi heritage.
So, Richard, why exhibit these? What's Israel trying to say?
Well, I mean, the Babel. Are you asking me, or?
Yeah.
Yes, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Babylonian exile is being, in some people's thinking, at any rate, is the most significant period of Jewish history. And I think that, in part, is why Haaretz labeled this as an extraordinary exhibition. And they're saying that school children all over Israel, virtually every school child in Israel, at some point will go and see this exhibition during the time. And it's been ongoing since January 1st, and it's still going on today.
So children are having an insight into their history.
And to their heritage and their history, and like I say, it's Jewish heritage, and extraordinary links are being. You can go to the website of the Israel Antiquities Authority and see no less than 19 excavations that are listed as current and underway in the year 2015.
19 is a lot.
So that's a lot, and that's a lot of effort being expended to preserve Jewish heritage. And this is, while, as I say, all of this is going on in Iraq and Syria, and places like the Mosul Museum or Raqqa or various different archaeological sites in Syria as well, where things are just being destroyed.
And Richard, there have been reports in the British media that a lot of objects go from Syria to Europe, in Switzerland, in Germany, and even the UK, and Gulf countries like Dubai and Qatar. Have you heard this too?
Well, that's my understanding, is that a lot of these items are ending up either in private collections or they're ending up in auction houses in places like, London or Geneva or New York. And I think a lot of the problem seems to be that, well, some of the people who run some of these auction houses or museums are maybe not quite as scrupulous as others, and may, be willing to sort of look the other way in terms of, making a determination on the provenance of the artifacts.
Okay, well, Richard, thanks so much for sharing your views today on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Joan, how closely are the artifacts from ancient civilizations linked to one's identity?
Well, I think in some ways that depends on your education and how you've learned about your heritage. And one of the problems in these countries is that education has not stressed the heritage. And as a result, for some people, it seems very distant. For people who've learned to appreciate and realize that it's an integral part of their whole country's history and being, that is very important. But we can even see with young Iraqis what's happening right now when they're being interviewed about what's happening in Mosul. They actually are feeling the hurt, and this is making them actually more interested in their heritage because they're seeing it being destroyed before their eyes. It's quite difficult in a country which has, what we've already talked about, so much pain and suffering, and it's rebuilding itself, to now make people realize that looking to the past is as important as to looking to the future. But without that, I think things will not, the future of Iraq will have difficulties without making sure it honors its past.
Anything to add?
No, I would agree with that entirely. And going back to something we were talking about a few minutes ago, is our roots go back so far, and mankind is in a continuing process of discovering how far the roots go back. And we cannot erase it. We cannot erase it. Islamic State may try and erase it, but we cannot erase it. But the material, this is what archaeologists do, is we deal with the material evidence for the human past. And I think it's precious beyond everything.
We can erase the material.
They can erase material, but they cannot destroy the truth.
Yeah. But if it's mainly replicas being destroyed, as we see...
Well, sadly, that turns out not to be the case. It is true that in the museum in Mosul, there were replicas among the artifacts which we saw being destroyed, and at an early stage it was thought that the majority were replicas, but further study has revealed that not to be the case.
It's very sad.
It is very sad.
I mean, how common has looting been in the archaeological world through history?
Well, in wars there has always been looting and destruction of artifacts. That sadly has been part of the process of war, the darker side of the human journey, but it is also part of the truth. But the targeted and deliberate destruction of a culture, the attempt to eradicate a culture, has fortunately been rare.
Really?
What would come to mind first of all is the Cultural Revolution in China, where there was an attempt to eradicate the material remains of the past.
But didn't Hitler do that? Or try to do that?
It's unfinished with China, we'll come on to that. And in China, of course, they did succeed, in inverted commas, in destroying a lot of artifacts. But did they succeed in destroying Chinese history? Absolutely not. I mean, the Chinese are aware and proud of their history now.
Well, moving on. Now let's consider the wider implications of how the destruction of history can affect the future and future generations. Joan, museums can get a lot of bad press for taking artefacts from their site of origin. You know, the British Museum, Elgin marbles, we're familiar with that. But isn't it better that a museum houses these artefacts?
Well, that is a current debate that's going on right now, particularly even with looted objects. People are saying, why return them to Syria? Why return them to Iraq? The Syrian authorities are actually able right now to protect their own antiquities, and legally they should be returned to their countries of origin. I'm not going to go into past colonial ways, and your point about, hasn't there been looting over the centuries? The period of time when antiquarians decided to go out and buy from local individuals is not the time of today. So we have a different era to be looking at, and each country has its own antiquities laws, and those are the laws of the country that we should be obeying. So for museums, there are compromises that have to be made, objects that turn up that they decide don't belong to them or came from origins that perhaps are a little bit suspect. They need to carefully look at that. I mean, I believe in museums. We all love museums. We all love to go to museums, and isn't it wonderful? And the very fact that you can go to the British Museum and see Nimrud is unique. But that still does not mean that we should be thinking those are replacements for the countries of origin.
But isn't the destruction of artefacts just what happens in war? The victor comes along and they're not happy with what is there, so they...
No, generally, I don't think that's right at all. I think traditionally, artefacts have suffered in war through collateral damage and through looting to be taken. So paintings or statues being taken by Napoleon from Italy, or, as you say, by Hitler and elsewhere. But you mentioned Hitler earlier, but the Nazi regime didn't try and erase the past. They tried to impose their own view of
history. Except for the books, the burning of the books.
The
burning of the books, that is true. But I think museums are vitally important. Yes. I take the British Museum, as we're not too far away from it here. I can't think of anything bad about the British Museum.
That's right.
Maybe their tea. I haven't had tea there for a while, but I don't think there's anything bad about it. I think it's extremely good that these artefacts are being kept safe and cared for. In terms of what happened a century ago and 2 centuries ago, yes, it's true, we do things differently now. But we're archaeologists and historians. That's what happens. Society evolves. Medicine is better now than it was 200 years ago. Education is better than it was 200 years ago. Archaeology and understanding the past is better than it was 200 years ago.
One very important point to make is Britain hasn't signed something called the Hague Convention. Actually, Iraq has. The Hague Convention, which would protect cultural property, it's very complicated, and I'm sure you probably know about it. But that is something that should be done urgently by all combatant, all countries.
I was going to ask about legalities later on, but Britain hasn't signed it, that's interesting.
No, they haven't, although they were one of the early promoters of it, and they do adhere to the rules of the Hague Convention, but they have not ratified it.
Okay, we'll come back to that later. Now, joining us over the phone in London is Nargis Yaqub, an Iraqi activist and member of the Catholic Church. Nargis, as an Iraqi and member of the Chaldean Catholic Church, I know you are well connected with the Christian community in Iraq. Can you give us an insight into what is happening over there, to the churches, the devastation there?
Hello. Yeah, are you talking about destruction of people or destruction of culture?
Culture.
Culture, yeah. That followed the destruction of people anyway. It's an act of savagery. Really, it seems that they want to destroy everything about Iraq, as if there is an aim or a plan behind that. And you're talking about the British Museum. That was approved by the Iraqi government at the time when it was done, and it's something good for us, because if we can't keep our history and talk about our history, other people are doing that for us. Which is good. But this destruction, I just can't believe. The people are just watching and doing nothing about it.
With churches being burnt, do you fear this is the end of Christianity in Iraq and Syria?
I think it looks that that's the plan, because it started from 2003. It's not now with ISIS. It started from before, 2004, 2006, 2007, burning the churches, burning the documents. So it is as if to destroy everything that will say there was Christianity here in these areas. And the coincide of Syria and Iraq at the same time, they are doing the same thing systematically.
Now, just hold that thought. Joan, is this the end of civilization such as the Assyrians?
Yes, I mean, in Syria it's the cradle of Orthodox Church, and in Iraq it's Catholic and Orthodox alike. And the same thing is happening in both countries. So it is destroying religion, and it is the end, because whatever left of Iraqis, there's no Iraq, and there will be no Syria as well.
Now,
so it is a plan, yeah.
Now, I'm just going to bring our studio guest in to just join the discussion. Joan, do you agree with that?
Well,
Yeah,
I certainly agree that we're moving towards an Iraq that is not supporting its Christian and minority groups. Many have fled to, Iraqi Kurdistan. They are trying to make lives there. But I think in the end, most will try and leave Iraq because there is no future for them with the way things are now. And that's something that really the world community needs to be trying to address.
But this is not just about Christian artifacts.
No.
Shia, Sufi artifacts are being vandalized, aren't they? So what is happening there?
I think the difference is that the Christians are truly a smaller minority. They used to be a really large number. And every year, more and more leave, and the numbers now are really quite small. And I'm sure that Nargis would know from her family and friends that there are so many more outside of Iraq than are in Iraq now. So there are communities all over the world. But to keep that going, to have that intangible heritage that Giovanni was talking about is something that is crucial to keep for Iraq.
No, I'm very glad that you mentioned it and use that particular phrase. My heart bleeds for the Christian communities of Iraq, and my heart bleeds for us as humanity that this is happening. The Christian communities of Iraq are some of the oldest Christian communities in the world, going back to the very early centuries of Christianity. And they preserved and preserved a tradition which went back for almost 2,000 years. I used to work in Mosul in the late 80s, and in the afternoons when work was finished, we could go and wander around the souk. Of course, that's unthinkable now. We could go and wander around the souk, and then go to the churches, and then just sit down and just listen to the Chaldean chanting, and it was mesmerizingly beautiful. Now, this tradition hasn't died, but it's under severe threat, and once again, the intangible heritage, it's so important to remember and respect, and do everything we can to protect that too.
Nargis, according to a recent study reported in the Daily Telegraph, Christianity will remain the world's top religion in 2050, despite the growth of Islam and atheism increasing in the West. Could, in one way, this devastation bring Christians in the Middle East closer together?
They are together. The Christians among themselves, they are together. I mean, we're talking about humanity here. They mentioned about humanity. It is all humanity in Iraq. We didn't have these differences before. So when it's showing this thing now, it's against humanity. The first thing was against the intellectuals, doctors. I mean, it was systematically done to be finished, as if to perish the Iraqis from the Iraq, and to eventually Iraq will disappear from the world map. So Christians to be reserved only by, they left Iraq, and we have them here, America, Europe. This is what remained from us.
Well, it's very sad, but thank you,
Very
Nargis.
sad, yes.
Thank you for your views today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
John, there's a lot of talk of international help when it comes to preserving Iraq and Syria's culture. I mean, if the international community hasn't been able to help human lives, how can we begin with archaeology?
Well, I think it's quite right. Doing everything we can to help the people under ISIS dictatorship is more important at the moment. But the ISIS regime will come to an end. It will come to an end. I think it can
You
be
think-
done quicker, but I'm certain it will come to an end. It's internally and morally corrupt. It's evil, it's repugnant. It will end. When it does, the Middle East and the world will have a huge job to do, among other things, helping to preserve, conserve, and regenerate the cultural heritage of these regions.
Joan, is this a chance for new identities to be forged?
I don't really see this as being something that will have a positive outcome in any ways, other than perhaps, as I mentioned, Iraqis feeling that it will bring them together. What Narjis was saying about in the older eras, Iraqis felt themselves to be Iraqis. They all worked together. And I'm afraid I do feel that since 2003, that has changed. And if this can bring Iraq together in a way that people feel that they have a unified country, that maybe will be a positive
But
step.
don't civilizations evolve, and this is a time to reinvent? Doesn't that happen in history?
Yes, but perhaps we don't need this kind of jolting in the modern era. We hope life moves on from such cruelty.
Yes, the only positive thing I can think of to add to that is when ISIS is destroyed and the world is in the process of rebuilding, there will be more awareness worldwide of the precious heritage at stake.
Yeah. Well, joining us over Skype from Germany is Dr. Konrad Hirschler, reader in the history of the Near and Middle East at SOAS University. Dr. Hirschler, what is ISIS achieving by destroying Mosul's ancient churches and the Armenian church of Deir Zur?
Well, good evening, first of all. Certainly the destruction between the churches in Mosul and the church in Deir Zur are two different cases to some extent. First and foremost, ISIS certainly want to create a unified state in accordance with its ideology, as much as other movements and groups have done in history. Secondly, ISIS certainly, when it comes to the Armenian church in Deir Zur, which was only built in the early 20th century, want to reinforce its religious credentials by showing that they are implementing a very strict interpretation of the Sharia, i.e. that all churches built after a certain region has become Muslim have no legitimacy and can be destroyed. And thirdly, the destruction of the church in Deir Zur, which was obviously a church for the remembrance of the Armenian genocide, very much goes hand in hand with the denial of the genocide against Christians in the early 20th century, and goes hand in hand with the historical perspectives, which are sustained by one of the main sponsors, not of ISIS, but of extremist movements in the area over the last 3-4 years, the state of Turkey.
I mean, actions taken by ISIS have been described as ethnic cleansing. How else do groups go about ethnic cleansing beyond destroying sites? I'm talking about maps or changing city names.
Yeah, ethnic cleansing obviously involves a whole range of different strategies in order to project an ethnically homogeneous image on a specific region, which of course is always a fiction. And one of the most important ways of ethnic cleansing is certainly suppression of languages. That's of utmost importance, so any remnants of non-Arabic languages spoken in the region should be get rid of, because they are closely associated, except for Kurdish, and they are closely associated with Christianity and with non-Muslim identities. The changing of place names, the changing of maps is a project which had already been undertaken by the newly arisen nation states in the area over the last 60, 70 years or so, where regions which had historically been ethnically much more diverse were subject to a very strong process of Arabification. And in Syria, obviously, under the Assad regime, not only the Christian minorities, but also the Kurds were subject to very brutal and sustained campaign of Arabization.
Well, Dr. Hatra, we're running out of time there, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise on today's programme.
Okay, thanks very much.
John, how far do you agree with this statement? In order to dictate the future, ISIS is destroying the past?
Well, I don't agree with that statement. They are doing their best to destroy the material past, and as we were just saying, they can destroy objects. They cannot destroy the truth, and they cannot destroy the future. But they can certainly make life difficult for the people who live in the countries after they've gone.
Is the obliteration of history going to affect the future?
I think that it's quite difficult for us to know what the outcome of all of this is going to be. But one thing I would like to also point out, it's just not ISIS, but it's also destruction of cultural heritage through neglect by other ways, and development and things like that. So we're right now concentrating on something that is easy to pinpoint, but we all should realize that cultural heritage needs to be protected on a daily basis by all of us in the region and in our own countries as well.
And John, the final question, despite what's happening, excavations do still continue. A team recently went from Manchester University and they've discovered 50 new documents written in Babylonian. And one of the directors, Dr. Moon, remarked, if the militants think they can erase history, we are helping to make sure that can't happen. It is the information that is important and not the objects. And do you agree with that?
I don't think one has to choose between the object and the information, but yes, certainly the information is critically important. And it's fantastic, the expedition which Dr. Moon and her husband and Dr. Campbell have been directing at Tel Khaiber in the south of Iraq. And there's also been an expedition in the northern part of Iraq. That is much less than there were last year, but I'm hopeful that quite soon archaeological activity will return in greater number.
Yes?
I agree with that.
Okay. Let's hope so. As we have seen today, the destruction of cultural and religious heritage in Iraq and Syria is not just about a few buildings being damaged. This is a strand to the Islamic State's ethnic cleansing, their quest to wipe out diversity in the region, and the memory of civilizations that they deem not in line with their own version of history. It would be easy to turn a blind eye to the devastation, but these are the sites of the birthplace of civilization and therefore affects us all. Governments, the media, and the international community must work together and take action to save this heritage. By losing a shared connection with the ancient past, we risk losing our modern identity too. I'd like to thank all my guests on today's show: Giovanni Boccardi, Richard Edmondson, Nargis Yaqub, Dr. Konrad Hatra, and of course my studio guests, Joan Porter McKeever and Dr. John McGuinness. Thank you so much for your invaluable contributions.
Pleasure.
Until next time, goodbye.